All right, we're back, and the next thing we're going to talk about is opening a checking account. And you have to open a checking account as soon as you can, because the last thing I want you to do is pay for business expenses personally. And if you don't open a checking account, there's going to be things that you need to spend, things like buying a portable computer or something like that, or buying a printer, and you'll be tempted to go out to Best Buy and buy this printer, and since it's only $99, you pay for it yourself, but that's exactly the wrong thing to do. You have to start thinking in two dimensions now. I am a person and I am a business, and you can't intermingle the two, and every time you do, you're going to get into trouble. Now, you set up the checking account as soon as you can. When you set up the checking account, the bank is probably going to want to know your EIN number. Now, if you don't have an EIN number for them right away, what you have to do is give them your Social Security number, but that is only temporary. As soon as you get your EIN number, you call the bank and you tell them, here's my EIN number, take my Social Security number off of it. So you do that only to get your checks. Now, then if you don't know where you're going to be practicing yet, and you probably don't when you get your checks, then get some blank checks. This is what they call starter checks. And they'll give you a packet of 10 starter checks. And just realize that if you use those 10 starter checks, you can go back and get another packet of 10 starter checks. So don't be in too big a hurry to get your permanent checks in place, because you got to have your EIN number. You'll want to have your address on it. You'll probably want to have your phone number on it. So get your checking account set up early, but get it set up just with starter checks, and give them your Social Security number till you get your EIN number, and then switch out this EIN number for the Social Security number. One other thing, if you're going to use QuickBooks as far as a check writing system, you may want to not order checks from the bank, because you're going to order them from QuickBooks, and you're going to print them off that way. Do you use QuickBooks checkbook?
Yeah, we use QuickBooks, and we order our checks directly from QuickBooks because they just work perfectly with their system. You know, the other thing with bank accounts today is electronic bill pay system.
Yeah.
And wow, can that save a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's very, very good point. You might as well put them on there early, get started
Absolutely.
right away early. And if you're not going to use a QuickBooks check writing system, I suggest that you get NCR checks, no carbon required checks, so that when you write a check, when you write a physical check, which you won't be doing much of if you have got the electronic bill pay, but when you write a check, it keeps a copy of it, a carbon copy of it, and I think that's a good idea. Now, when you go to the bank, of course, you open your checking account. But while you're there, you want to apply for a debit card too, tied to that checking account. And you want to apply for a credit card, so you'll have a debit card for your business and a credit card for your business. And here's how I want you to use them. Use the debit card frequently. That's the one that you use. The credit card, I hope that you never use except for real rare situations. Here's an example. If you go to get your CEUs in another state and you check into a hotel and you give them your debit card, the hotel room may be $150, but they may take $400 out of your checking account because they want to make sure they cover it all. I had an interesting situation. I had a nanny that was a full-time nanny with me, and she was from Bulgaria. Well, her mother was coming over from Bulgaria to visit, and they wanted to tour the United States. So I thought it would be nice if I said, what would you like to see in the United States? And they named Niagara Falls, Washington, D.C., New York City, Disney World was one of the places they wanted to go. And so I said, okay, I'll give you, I'll pay for your trip around the United States, because I didn't want, at the time I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I didn't want this lady from Bulgaria to think that Lincoln, Nebraska represented the whole United States. I sometimes kid, I love Lincoln, Nebraska, it's my hometown, and I'm partial to it, but I sometimes kid and I say that, it's not the end of the world, Lincoln, Nebraska, but if you look west from there, you can see it. I was was thinking about having a seminar there, so I went to one of the hotels and I saw in the rooms it said things to do in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I picked up the book and opened it up and it said, "You're doing it." And I opened the next page and it said, "Things to do in Nebraska: take a bus to Des Moines." But I like Lincoln, but the idea is I want them to see the whole United States. And when I put $4,000 in her checking account and gave her the debit card. And it was like 7 days, and they called back and they said, "We're out of money." And I thought, man, they went through a lot of money,
Wow.
4,000 in 7 days. But what happens? They stayed at a different hotel every night. They used that debit card and they were taking money out. So use your credit card only sparingly for things like that. Everything else, use your debit card so you never run up a debt. That's what you want to avoid, running up a debt in your clinic. Now, and then by the way, designate those cards for business. Do not use them for personal for any reason whatsoever. Don't use them for personal. Now, let's talk about some of the financing options that you have. If you get into practice, you have to first decide whether you really need financing. I would say that only about 20% of therapists actually get any financing at all. The rest of them have a little money saved, or they just go into practice slowly. They slide into practice or something like that. So there's a lot of times when you don't really need any financing. That's the situation.
Right.
But you do want to be fairly well. You do want to have enough money behind you.
Yeah, one of the number one failures of business, according to the SBA, is undercapitalization. So not having enough money in the beginning to get the practice started, enough money to live on. You got to make sure you're well enough capitalized that you don't suck yourself under just because you didn't have it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have to know where your money's coming from before you get into practice, and you better plan on having about 3 months worth of capital that you can live on before your practice starts producing for you. And so first we have to, when we think about financing, we have to consider the cost of getting into business. And of course you can get into business, the old concept is this: if you have a couch, a chair, and a clipboard, you're in business. That's the old therapist idea. If you have a couch, a chair, and a clipboard, you're in business. But realistically, you will be spending some money, and so there are some startup expenses that you're going to have, and there are monthly expenses that you're going to have. So, Michael, why don't you just go through, and we have a list here. We're going to show you an example of startup expenses.
Sure, and these are just some examples. But if we look at security deposit and rent, your first month, you're going to have to pay first month's rent, and you're going to have to pay a security deposit. If your rent's $450 and your security deposit is $450, you're going to pay $900 up front. Referral directories. We got to get the word out that we're in business. Psychology Today is $30. Other referral directories in your area might be $20, so we just budgeted $70. We got to have a sign, $100. You got to have your malpractice insurance, your liability insurance. We already said that's one of the very first steps you got to do before you go into practice. So there's $100. There's going to be software associated with doing business. You're going to need a computer. And you could argue that you could go out and buy a computer for less than $600, but if you really want a good computer, that's probably about what you're going to spend. You're going to need some furniture, a desk, a few chairs, those kind of things. $2,300. Printer, a fax, a copier. Going to need some office equipment like that. $175. Phone, internet service, $350. You're going to need some forms. You're going to need, if you're doing insurance, there's CMS forms. There's, different forms you're going to need for your office. You got new patient forms and so forth. Consulting. You're going to have accountants and things like that are going to be on your teams. Attorneys, possibly, absolutely.
Possibly.
So $200. We believe it's important too that you have a kind of a contingency or a miscellaneous fund, anywhere from 5 to 15, 20% of your total budget, maybe 10%, let's say, should be in a contingency fund just for things that go wrong during the year. So we've got $500. So it's approximately $5,400. Call it $5,500 to get started.
Yeah, and you can argue the price, but I have found universally therapists tend to underestimate the cost of getting into practice and underestimate the overhead that they have per month. Now, getting into practice, that varies. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. But almost every time, therapists underestimate how much it actually costs them in monthly fees. And you say, how much did you collect last year? And they say, I collected $100,000. What was your overhead? Oh, it was only about $1,000 a month. Well, if that's the case, then your overhead for the year was $12,000, which meant you took home $88,000. Oh no, I took home $46,000. You know, they underestimate by a lot of times double.
Right.
So tell them about what typical monthly expenses are going to be.
Well, typically, you know, you're gonna spend about $450 or so for rent, your phone.